Thank you and good morning. So in my talk, really, I'll not go too deep into the SSTC issues. I really want to lay out some of the broader issues that we need to take into account as we get into the partnership. I think the great thing about the PPD framework is I spent some time to go on the website yesterday and just looked at some of the data. I mean, when you look at whatever indicator, whether it's population size, you're looking at Gambia with 2 million people, slightly more than 2 million, to countries with more than 1 billion people. We look at contraceptive use. The variation is so big that in a way, the platform itself calls for learning from each other, because a lot of the issues some countries are dealing with now, other countries have gone beyond those issues. But also a critical thing to note is that as we talk about the unfinished agenda of the ICPD, it's important to note that the issue about addressing population and development issues can never actually be the finished agenda, right? Because every country, irrespective of where you are in your development cycle, there are always population and development issues that you need to deal with. The issues just vary depending on the circumstance in which you are and so on. So I just wanted to make that point that the PPD framework, the ICPD agenda, has to be an ongoing agenda, because in the end, even in the advanced countries, there are issues. You are moving maybe from high child dependency to having a bigger population in the working ages, to having more people in the elderly ages as birth rates and so on change. So every country has to deal with these issues. But I just wanted to start off by asking you to meet this young girl here, Malaika. Her name could be, my daughter's name is Tenjiwe, could be Sindisiwe, could be Tandeka, could be Chikondi. But really what we are facing when you are a 14-year-old girl, could be from Kenya, could be from Bulawayo, could be from Kinshasa. She's one of 6 children living in a rural area. Her family is poor and vulnerable to health, economic, political, and environmental shocks. She has a 1 in 4 chance of becoming pregnant during adolescence, which will then lead to early marriage, and most likely she will drop out of school. Her status results from a multiple set of issues, individual, household, community, systemic factors which must be addressed holistically. So really what we are talking about here, and that's the main point I wanted to put on the table, is that the issues that the ICPD is addressing cannot be addressed in a siloed manner. And I think for us who work in the population SRH field, we also need to find ways in which we reinforce these the integrations that need to be done, that we don't just speak to ourselves, that we reach out to the other sectors whose work can contribute to achieving the ICPD agenda. So you look at this girl, you have to look at education, you have to look at the enabling policy environment, strengthening health systems, enabling legal, political, and policy frameworks, addressing drivers of early marriage and intended pregnancy and so on. But there are also big issues. Yesterday there was the point about what are these other mega trends that we are living under? Climate change. How do we, as the population and development field, start also engaging more in climate change discourses? For the first time this year, at the COP28, there's going to be a whole day dedicated to climate and health, to health. And I think as a population is so related, reproductive health is a big part of that. Are we in the midst of these discussions, or are we mainly just speaking to ourselves? So I think my core really is to say, let's go across our comfort zones, our boundaries, so that as we talk about South-South triangular partnership, even within South-South, even within the triangular partnerships, it should not just be those of us who are working in population. And I think it's also critical to note as we think about the post-2030 agenda these numbers have probably been there. The population is going to grow rapidly. What this means is that the urgency to address these issues has to be more critical now, that the scale of the challenges we are facing are going to expand. So the global population is growing. About 2035, 2037, it will be 9 billion. Last year we were talking about 8. So just taking 15 years, you add another billion people. And by 2070, there will be more than 10 billion people in the world. Most of this growth is going to be generated from Africa. As you can see, Asia, by 2070, actually the population will start declining. So Africa is really where most of this growth, and I think the question we need to ask, if by 2070 Africa will have close to a third of the global population, we have to ask big questions about what sort of population this will be. This can be a very, very big resource for Africa's socioeconomic advancement, but only if this population is well educated, if it's empowered, and if it's economically engaged. The other big issue that is going to happen is also the issue, because we talk about population and development, and sometimes we lose sight of some of these bigger trends, there's the whole issue of urbanization. It's part of the ICPD agenda. And the world is increasingly becoming urban. What are the implications for programming? What are the implications for preparing for this future? Africa, by 2035, will have more people living in urban than rural areas. And we need to think about that. And I think the other issue is the issue about age structure changes. That, as you see, in the world, you are having globally a decline in people, in children, 0 to 20, an increase in people in the working ages, and an increase in the elderly. Africa, that's where now the biggest increase in this period will be, having more people in the working ages. And I think when we talk about the demographic dividend, we are really asking the question, will Africa be ready to take advantage of its population dynamics as a driving force for its future, as the age structure changes from having more children to having more workers? Before we have more elderly people, is the continent going to take advantage of this? And I think the African Union came in 2017, prioritized the demographic dividend. All our countries here came and gave statements on this. But you know, last year, we worked with UNFPA, SRO, and did an evaluation, an assessment of how far have the countries gone. And what we saw there, we had this report on best practices in operationalizing the demographic dividend. We saw that countries like Kenya, Uganda, Zambia had made the most progress, but there are a lot of challenges. Many of the countries were asking, what specifically should we do? How should we integrate these issues into development and budgeting processes? And also, how do we coordinate across sectors? Because if we are talking to ourselves as people in population, it's easy, right? But when we talk about the demographic dividend, we have to bring people in education on the table, people in environment, in agriculture, and so on. So these are the challenges, and I'm putting this on the table when we talk about the unfinished agenda. The DD was a big buzz, 2017, 2020. But right now, is it just a dying, another development rhetoric that is dying? And how can we reactivate that as we think about repositioning ourselves going forward? Another critical issue is this issue I was saying about the links between population, climate change, and the environment. We did some studies some years ago at AFIDEP, just looking at what are the links. And we found out that the countries that have what you might call the big challenges in terms of population, high levels of unmet need, are also the countries that seem to be simultaneously being most vulnerable to climate change. And I think as we think about this, these are we came up with 15 hotspots in Africa. So we cannot just be talking about ICPD without looking at what is happening. And at AFIDEP now, we are running a program that is happening in Asia as well as in Africa, looking at how do we actually use systems thinking to have an integrated approach in addressing population challenges. So we are building capacity for integrated family planning, reproductive health, population, environment, and development, using a holistic approach. We cannot just go there and look at these issues. And I think when you look at people working in environment, in climate change, there are a lot of resources there that we can tap into, but we have to make the investment case on why population and reproductive health needs to be on the table. I'll just end by highlighting this report that the Global Sustainable Development Report that was done this year to assess how far our countries have gone on SDGs. Each of our countries did our own country reports and so on. But I think the critical thing to note, they came up with a number of recommendations: human well-being and capabilities, entry point number 1, sustainable and just economics, so that we are really looking at how to make our development more equitable, food systems and nutritional patterns. There's an issue about energy decarbonization and universal access to energy and other resources. And number 5 is urban and peri-urban development. I talked about urbanization as well. Global environmental commons, this issue about how do we really think about how we fit into climate change. And I think their big call to action was really that we should form these transformative frameworks for accelerated action. Member states should set national plans prioritizing key SDGs. We have to do priorities within priorities, do cost-benefit analysis, see which are the investments that will give us the best returns for the money that we are putting in, come up with business and local government roadmaps and so on. So I think for me, looking at the ICPD agenda and the PPD framework, there's a lot that we can learn from that. There's a big overlap, of course, between the SDGs and the ICPD program of action. But the most critical thing is we have to ask ourselves the question. It's the 20th meeting. Can we talk about maybe specific areas where, what have we achieved? I think if we ask the so what for this platform, are we really engaging to a level? We saw Kenya saying they went to Indonesia for a visit to learn about things and so on. I think to justify this is really a very, very powerful platform, but I think we need to show the gains that are coming in by this working together. What are the best ways of doing that? A lot of countries have gone through the challenges other countries are going through. Is there a structured mechanism within PPD to really promote SST and triangular, South-South and triangular coordination so that we are really coming up with a defined agenda and not just meeting, and then over time try to assess progress towards achieving what we've set as objectives. So that's really my call. It's good to meet. Victoria Falls is very, very beautiful. In the end, I have to say, let's ask ourselves the question, so what? For what purpose? What is this going towards? Are we having objectives on how we can interact more effectively? And after 2-3 years, make an evaluation of how well we are doing to get that. But I think the panelists here will give more details on the specifics of how we can get that done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.